Christians may be united with the rest of society on losing weight and managing their debt. We tend not to focus so much on our spiritual lives when it comes to these New Year's resolutions. And what I mean by that is we don't have a time as Christians that we stop every year and say, what could I this year do differently as a Christian? Now, we may allow ourselves to become convicted here and there with a sermon or a Sunday school lesson or smarter, but we don't consciously stop and evaluate our life from the past year and think, what could I do differently next year? And so with the rest of the sermon, what I want to do is look at this idea of change. This idea of change and what it means to our spiritual lives and how we as Christians should embrace change. We should embrace it. We should try to want to change. And so the first question I want to look at is, why should we embrace change? Why, as Christians, should we want this? And there are three reasons or three answers to this question that I have found. And the first is biblical. Matthew 18:3 says, talking about Jesus, he says, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. In Psalm 55, David is praising God for taking care of him and protecting him from his enemies. And in verse 15, he describes his enemies as this: men who never change their ways, meaning that's a bad thing. And James 1, it says, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, for you know that the testing of your spirits, develops perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work in you, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So why should we embrace trials? Consider joy whenever you face trials. Why should we embrace trials? Because you're living your life and all of a sudden something bad happens, like you break a leg, and you should embrace this. And God says that these trials, these bad changes that you have, you should embrace them, and you should consider it a joy when they're in your life, because they will make you mature and complete. It's a funny thing, but apparently the Bible has a lot to say about change and how it's a good thing. And the thing is, God is never satisfied with where you are. You could have just come off the best year spiritually, and you're at the highest peak, you're the closest you've ever been with God, and God is not satisfied with you being right there. God is not satisfied with you staying the same. He doesn't look at you and say, you're great where you are, right there. I don't want you to change anything else about yourself. You don't need to do anything else. No. He looks at your life and he sees that there's so much more possibility, that there's so much more he has in store for you. You may think it's great now, but just wait. Jeremiah 29:11, a very famous verse, says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me, and when you seek me, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. If we stay where we are and refuse to change and don't want to grow, we will be missing out on what God has in store for us. And you may like where your life is right now, but like I said, God is not finished. The more we pursue him, the more we are blessed by him. So why should we as Christians embrace change? Well, number one, it's biblical. Number two, change equals growth. You cannot grow unless you change. Here we go. I wanted to use an illustration. I thought of this, and without even having one of my own, I was talking to May, I was talking to some of the youth, and perfect example. This is her 1996 yearbook. She was a freshman in high school, I believe. And she had two examples of this, and it goes something like this. Maybe you've heard of this. This says, Maeve, have a great time next year. I promise to keep in touch, and I'll always come back and visit you. I don't think this happened. You're a wonderful friend and a person. Please don't ever change. I'll miss you, Nicole. Now, the thing I want to focus on is this idea of please don't ever change. And maybe you've heard this, these words of wisdom from junior hires and senior hires that they write them in here. Don't ever change. You're great the way you are. And I just think, don't ever change. Ever. Don't ever. Exactly right now, that's how you should be. And I think that's like the worst advice you could possibly give someone. Imagine your senior year of high school. Okay? Now imagine the way you were then, and that you never changed. So you're sitting here listening to me, and physically you look the same. But mentally, emotionally, you are just like you were your senior year of high school. You still think the same things are funny? You still value the same things? You still like the same kind of people? You've never learned from your mistakes. You've never matured. You were challenged, but you never grew from those challenges. And you managed to stay the same after all these years. You still like to have fun. Even after having kids, you still are like a 12th grader. And if you were to meet someone from high school who's never changed, maybe you know people like that who hold on to the glory years of high school, you would think, man, they need to grow up. They need to change. What is wrong with this person? And even if they were a good person, even if they were the best and most spiritual and leader and whatever, even if they were really good their senior year, to think that that's the best they're ever going to get is the equivalent of a 12th grader. That's really sad. No offense, seniors. I'm sure you're good now. And as much as we agree that don't ever change is not the way to live your life, for many Christians, that's exactly what we do. We get stuck doing the same things and we never allow ourselves to be stretched. We never question, what am I going to do differently this year than I did last year? And you may go to a small group and you may go to church, and that's great, but if you haven't changed from that, you're still doing the same thing, and you're still allowing yourself to be comfortable with the same thing. And that's about it. Francis Chan, in his book Crazy Love, which is right here, wrote this. Let me find it real quick. He says, we've conditioned ourselves to hear the messages without responding, talking about sermons and stuff like that. We've conditioned ourselves to hear messages without responding. Sermons have become Christian entertainment. Maybe you're entertained now. We go to church and hear a well-developed sermon and a convicting thought, and we've trained ourselves to believe that if we're convicted, then our job is done. I walked in there, man, that was a great sermon. And have you ever done that? Because I read this because this is what I do. You know, and like if you're talking to someone about a sermon, like, man, that's a good sermon. They're like, I didn't really get much out of it. Then you may think, well, I guess I was just paying a little bit more attention. You know, and you kind of feel like, well, I was the one convicted. I feel a little better about myself because at least I got something out of it. But then we walk out the doors and nothing changes. We think that the conviction is the big part of it, but we don't change anything about ourselves. James 1:22 says, do not merely listen to the word to deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like a man who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. In order to truly grow as Christians, we must look at what we're doing and ask ourselves, how can I do this better? What do I need to change in order to grow? So why should we embrace change as Christians? Well, first, it's biblical. And second, because change equals growth. And third, because without change, we become stagnant. Anytime I hear the word stagnant, I think of water. It's about the only context I hear that in. Stagnant water. If you were to get a glass, if it starts to rain and you get a glass and you go walk outside and hold that glass up, it'll start to fill up the glass with water and you could actually drink it. It's clean, it's rainwater, and you can drink it. But if you fill up that glass and set it on the ground and walk away and come back like a week later, it will become ridiculously nasty and stagnant. You would not want to drink it. And you didn't add anything to it. It just sat there and did nothing. That's all it did. Nothing. It didn't move. And all of a sudden now it's gotten gross. And this is a big deal for me. Like if I pour a glass of water out of the faucet, get a glass of water, and I drink it and I set it down and leave it there for an hour, and I come back and it's lukewarm, it's just room temperature, I'm like, I'm done. I don't want this anymore. Like even if it's still good but has kind of lost the coolness of it, I don't even want anything to do with it. I think it's so gross. And it's just one of my things. But we get comfortable living our lives as Christians, and so we stop trying to grow. We stop trying to grow ourselves, and so we become spiritually stagnant. We go to church and we're going through the motions, but then the more we do it, the easier it gets, and we just kind of go through the motions, and then pretty soon we're not challenged by anything. We're not moving, we're just stagnant.